I didn't realize how far things had gone until the silence was louder than the words. It started with a simple, innocent request. That's the way it always begins, doesn't it? Just a casual comment that seems harmless, but in hindsight, it was the first piece of a much larger puzzle. The kind of puzzle where the pieces don't fit, but they sure as hell look like they do. I still remember the exact moment it all started shifting. It wasn't some dramatic confrontation or some deep betrayal that sparked it. It was a Tuesday morning, just like any other. I was sitting at my desk, lost in the hum of my thoughts when I received the text from her. "Hey, can you pick up the dry cleaning today? I've got a few things to do." Not unusual, right? But there was something strange about her wording. A tiny detail that would have gone unnoticed if I hadn't been paying close attention. A few things to do? What things? It seemed like a strange choice of words. Normally, she would say something like work or meeting or even errands, but things seemed so vague, almost too general. I didn't give it much thought, though. Not yet. I was already planning on working late that evening, so I said yes, texted her back, and then went about my day. I didn't even notice the growing discomfort in my chest until the evening rolled around, when I stood in the dry cleaners, staring at the pile of clothes I was supposed to pick up, and felt an overwhelming urge to check my phone. There it was again. Another message. "Don't forget the plan. It's time." I stared at the screen, reading the words over and over. My fingers trembled slightly as I typed a reply, but before I could send it, the message disappeared. Vanished. Just like that. I looked at the time, wondering if it was some weird glitch or a mistake. It was gone. I was confused, but I brushed it off, thinking maybe I had imagined it. I couldn't be sure. Maybe I was just exhausted. That was my first mistake, but I still didn't see it. I didn't see the bigger picture. I was so wrapped up in my own life, so preoccupied with work and the usual monotony of daily routines, that I ignored the signs. The small things, the unexplained absences, the odd phone calls, the conversations that never seemed to make sense. She wasn't acting out of the ordinary, not in any way that would make me think there was something seriously wrong. But that text, it planted a seed that would soon grow into something unrecognizable. Over the next few days, the messages kept coming, one at a time, always at the most unexpected moments. Each one was more cryptic than the last. "It's happening tonight. Remember your place. This is the only way." I didn't know who was sending them, but I knew one thing. It was connected to her. Somehow, it was all tied to my wife. I began to question everything. Was I being paranoid? Was I just overthinking things, or had I finally crossed the line from normal curiosity into something far darker? I couldn't put my finger on it, but something was off. I started looking through her things. Her phone, her laptop, anything I could get my hands on. Nothing was out of the ordinary, not at first. But then I found it. A note. A simple note, hidden behind the drawer of her nightstand. It wasn't addressed to anyone in particular. Just a scribbled message, hastily written, almost as if she had written it in a rush. "He won't understand. He never will. But he'll figure it out soon enough. This is the only way." I felt my blood run cold. Who was she talking about? What was happening? And that's when it hit me. She was planning something big. She was part of something I didn't understand. I couldn't get my mind around it. I was just standing there, holding this note, trying to make sense of it, when the reality of it sank in. This wasn't some random event, some harmless misunderstanding. No, this was calculated. This was a plan, a plot unfolding right under my nose, and I was just too blind to see it. That night, I stayed up. My mind raced with possibilities. Who was she talking to? Who was the he in the note? Why didn't she tell me what she was planning? Was she really capable of something like this? I knew one thing for certain. I couldn't let this go. I couldn't sit back and wait for her to tell me what was happening, because at this point, I wasn't sure if she ever would. I had to find out on my own. I had to get answers. Little did I know, the answers I was searching for would take me to places I never wanted to go. They would change everything I thought I knew about my life, my marriage, and the woman I thought I loved. But tonight was when it all started. Tonight was when I began to unravel the threads of a story that would take me to the darkest corners of deception and betrayal. A story that would change everything, forever. The first piece was now in my hands. I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being watched, though I knew it was ridiculous. After all, I was just a guy trying to make sense of a strange note, a cryptic text, and a few too many quiet moments with a wife who had suddenly become a stranger. But as days passed, the feeling only grew stronger. It wasn't just my paranoia, I realized. There was something happening around me that I couldn't quite see yet. The very next morning after finding that note, Alara left for work early. It was a normal routine, but for the first time in years, I didn't feel like doing the usual things, having my coffee, reading the news, pretending everything was fine. No, today I was on edge, consumed by questions. What was she hiding? Who was involved in whatever was going on? I couldn't stop myself. I started looking through her things, but it wasn't the typical snooping. No, this was different. This felt like a desperate search for answers, like I was piecing together a puzzle that didn't fit. I pulled out her phone again, looking at the messages, the ones that weren't there the night before. There was nothing new, but I had to look again. Maybe I missed something. Maybe I wasn't supposed to see it, and that's why it was all gone. But there was a strange sense of guilt that weighed on me. I never wanted to be that person, the one who violated trust, who invaded privacy. But there was something so wrong about all of this, and I couldn't ignore it. That night, as I sat at the dinner table, Alara came home with a familiar smile, the one she always used when she didn't want me to ask questions. "How was your day?" I asked casually, though my heart was pounding in my chest. "It was fine," she said, brushing her hair out of her face and avoiding my gaze. "Just the usual stuff." I tried to keep my composure, but I could feel the weight of the conversation sitting between us. I didn't ask about the text message from her friend or the strange note I had found. No, I couldn't ask yet. I had to be careful. One wrong move, one slip up, and I'd lose the chance to get to the bottom of this. After dinner, she headed upstairs, as usual. I stayed behind, trying to appear relaxed, but my mind was racing. I needed more answers. I couldn't let this go. I needed to know what was happening. But there was something I didn't anticipate. I didn't realize that Alara had already caught on. Later that night, just as I was about to step into the bathroom, I heard the faintest sound, a click, almost like a door closing softly. I froze. It wasn't the normal noise of a house settling. It was the unmistakable sound of a door being locked from the inside. I stood there, confused, feeling like I had just stumbled into a situation that was bigger than I realized. Was she locking herself away from me? Or was it something more? I waited for a moment, wondering if I had heard it wrong, but then I heard the soft thud of footsteps from upstairs, and it was followed by the sound of a muffled voice, not Alara's. Another voice, a male one. I froze, my heart pounding in my chest. My first thought was that I had made a mistake. Maybe I hadn't heard anything at all. Maybe it was just the pipes, or the sound of something outside. But no, it was undeniable now. There was someone in the house. Someone who wasn't supposed to be here. I didn't know what to do. My mind raced, but I couldn't act without knowing for sure. I tiptoed up the stairs, trying to make no sound, my breath caught in my throat. The door to our bedroom was ajar, and I could hear murmurs, soft, muffled whispers. The hairs on the back of my neck stood up. I hesitated. What if I was wrong? What if I opened that door and found something I couldn't unsee? I could feel my stomach churning as I gripped the doorframe, just inches away from the truth. But before I could move any closer, I heard a sound that made my blood run cold. "Alara, we've been over this. He'll never understand. It's time." I barely breathed. The voice wasn't just any voice. It was the same voice I'd heard in the background of those strange text messages, the one I could never place. And it wasn't just some random guy. This was someone she knew, someone she trusted. I didn't know if I should confront them right then and there, or if I should wait until I had more answers. But at that moment, I knew I had to be careful. If this was the beginning of something more, something I wasn't prepared for, I had to think clearly. I couldn't just rush in blindly. I retreated down the hallway, my heart pounding in my chest. I felt like I was trapped in a game that I didn't understand, surrounded by shadows that I couldn't escape. I had crossed a line now, and there was no turning back. I couldn't pretend I hadn't heard that voice, that statement. There was more to this than I could have ever imagined, and it was all coming to a head far sooner than I was ready for. I had to figure out what was happening before I lost control. I had to know who was involved, how deep this went, and most importantly, what Alara had been hiding all this time. And that night, I made a decision. I would wait just a little longer, but I would be ready when the truth finally came crashing down. This was just the beginning. The days after that night were a blur. My mind had started to spin, trying to make sense of everything I had overheard. I had to tell myself that I was just imagining things, that maybe I'd misheard the conversation upstairs, but deep down, I knew that wasn't the case. That voice, it wasn't just in my head. It wasn't a trick of my imagination. I had heard it loud and clear. But what the hell did it mean? What was Alara involved in? And who was the he that she and this mystery man kept referring to? I couldn't sleep, couldn't think straight. Every time I closed my eyes, all I could hear was that hushed whisper, the words lingering in my mind. He'll never understand. It's time. The worst part was that I couldn't bring myself to confront her. Not yet. I knew that if I did, I might lose any chance of ever understanding what was truly going on. If I pushed too hard, I could push her away forever, and that wasn't something I was ready for. Not yet. But I couldn't just sit there, either. I needed to know more. I had to find out who this person was, and what they were planning. The next morning, Alara left for work earlier than usual, and for the first time in days, I felt a slight sense of relief. At least I had time to think. Time to figure out my next move. I started by going back to the note I had found hidden in her nightstand. I pulled it out again, reading the words over and over, trying to decode them. It didn't make sense, but something in the phrasing struck me as odd. He won't understand. He never will. It wasn't just vague, it felt personal. It felt like they were talking about me. But what didn't I understand? What was I missing? I needed more. More than the cryptic note. More than the texts that kept disappearing. So I did something I'd never thought I would. I reached out to Lila, Alara's best friend. If anyone knew what was going on, it was her. She'd been Alara's confidant for years, and I had always trusted her. But now, I wasn't sure who I could trust. I had to take a risk. I sent Lila a message, keeping it casual at first. Hey, just wanted to check in. How's Alara doing? I've been feeling like she's been distant lately. The response came almost immediately. Oh, she's fine. Just stressed, you know? Work, life. Everything's been a little crazy lately. You know how she is. She'll be all right. I stared at the message, wondering if it was just an empty answer. Lila had always been good at playing things off, especially when she didn't want to get involved in something messy. But I couldn't stop now. If there was even the smallest chance she knew something, I needed to push further. So, I asked, is there anything I can do to help her? She's been kind of off recently. Lila's reply took longer this time, almost too long. I waited, tapping my fingers nervously against the table. When her message finally came through, it wasn't what I expected. I don't know, Tobias. She's been going through a lot. Maybe you should talk to her. But sometimes people need space to figure things out. Just give her time. I was left staring at my phone, feeling more uncertain than ever. Was this her way of telling me to back off? Or was she trying to give me a hint? Whatever it was, it didn't sit right with me. She was avoiding the question, and I couldn't let that go. But I had to tread carefully. That afternoon, as I sat in the living room, I began to piece together everything I knew. Alara's behavior, the strange messages, the hidden note. There had to be something I was missing. She was planning something, and whatever it wasn't good for me. Later that evening, she came home late again. It had become a pattern, late nights, unexplained absences. But tonight, something was different. She wasn't alone. As I was cleaning up after dinner, I heard the unmistakable sound of a car pulling into the driveway. My heart skipped a beat when I saw her walking into the house with someone. A man I didn't recognize. I froze, trying to make sense of what I was seeing. Alara was laughing, her head tilted back in that familiar way she did when she was happy, but this time, it was with someone else. Someone who wasn't me. They were too comfortable with each other, too relaxed. They walked into the house, chatting as if they were old friends, but when they saw me standing by the door, everything stopped. Their conversation died in an instant. The man's eyes met mine, and I could feel the tension in the air. Alara quickly smiled, a smile that didn't reach her eyes. Hey, Tobias. This is Matt. He's an old colleague of mine. We were just catching up. I stared at them, feeling a wave of nausea wash over me. Matt. I'd never heard her mention anyone named Matt before. But something about the way they acted, the way they exchanged that silent glance, made my skin crawl. I managed to force a smile. Nice to meet you, Matt, I said, trying to sound normal, though I felt anything but. He nodded, not offering much more than a polite smile before he quickly excused himself, making an exit almost too hurried. The door closed behind him with a soft click, but the silence between Alara and me was deafening. I stood there, unable to speak, unable to ask the questions that burned in my mind. Alara, for the first time in a long while, seemed uncomfortable. She didn't make eye contact, and she quickly moved to the kitchen to grab a glass of water, avoiding my gaze. I had to know. I couldn't wait any longer. Who is he, Alara? She looked at me, her face betraying nothing. I told you, Tobias. Just an old colleague. I could see the lie in her eyes, the way her voice trembled ever so slightly. I knew she wasn't telling the truth, but I couldn't push her now. Not like this. I had to play it cool. I couldn't show her that I knew she was hiding something, but I also couldn't shake the feeling that something was very wrong. That man, Matt, was somehow at the center of it all, and I needed to find out exactly how. As she disappeared upstairs to our bedroom, I stood in the hallway, feeling the weight of the situation bearing down on me. I couldn't let this slide. I couldn't ignore it anymore. It was time to confront her. But not just yet. I wasn't ready to lose the last bit of control I had over this situation. Not yet. It's strange how much can change in a matter of days. I had been calm, methodical, trying to figure out a plan, but suddenly, everything felt like it was slipping through my fingers. After that night with Matt, the stranger who Alara so casually introduced as an old colleague, something inside me snapped. I didn't know what I was walking into, but I knew I couldn't keep pretending everything was fine. This wasn't some miscommunication or an overblown misunderstanding. Something was happening behind closed doors, and I was being kept out of the loop. I tried to go about my day as usual, but my mind was a tornado of thoughts. Every little detail was like a clue, and I felt like I was just one piece away from uncovering the truth. But the more I thought about it, the more questions piled up. Why hadn't she told me about Matt before? Why did she act so evasive whenever I asked anything even remotely personal? What was going on with her and her friends, and why were they all acting so secretive? I had always trusted Alara. We'd been together for years, and I never once doubted her loyalty. But now, everything felt uncertain. Every interaction, every look, felt like a performance, like she was playing a part, and I was the fool who hadn't caught on. That night, things escalated faster than I expected. I had come home late from work, and the house was quiet. Too quiet. Alara was already home, but she hadn't said anything when I entered. I walked into the living room to find her sitting on the couch, eyes glued to her phone, her fingers moving quickly over the screen as if she was trying to hide something. It was the first time I'd seen her like this in weeks, so absorbed, so distracted. "Who are you texting?" I asked, trying to keep my voice steady, though I could feel the tension in my chest. She looked up quickly, her eyes wide for just a split second, before she gave me a strained smile. "Just Lila. She's been going on and on about something. I don't know." She waved it off like it was no big deal. But I wasn't buying it. The way she had reacted, the way she tried to cover it up so quickly, made it clear that something wasn't right. I stayed silent for a moment, staring at her. I could feel the weight of my suspicions pressing down on me. I needed to know what was going on, but I had to be careful. I couldn't let her know I was onto her. Not yet. I decided to let it go for that night, but I knew I couldn't wait much longer. Something was building inside me, an urge to confront her, to demand answers. But what would I do if she denied everything? What if she turned it around on me? I wasn't sure I could handle another lie, another dismissal. The next morning, as soon as Alara left for work, I made my move. I knew I had to act quickly. I couldn't let the opportunity slip away again. I grabbed her phone, the one she was glued to the night before, and started going through her messages. I was careful, not wanting to trigger any kind of alert that she might have on her phone. But I couldn't just sit around. I had to know. The messages were a blur at first, just typical conversations with her friends and coworkers. But then, I came across something that made my heart race. It was a group chat with a few people I didn't recognize. The messages were fast, as if they were in the middle of a conversation. One message stood out immediately. "Tobias is getting suspicious. We need to move faster." I felt my stomach drop. Move faster? What the hell did that mean? I scrolled up, heart pounding in my chest, looking for anything else that could give me a clue. The messages seemed innocuous at first. Talk about plans for the weekend, vague comments about Alara needing space. But the more I read, the more the pieces started to fit together. They were talking about a plan involving me. And it wasn't just a casual conversation. It was serious. They were strategizing, making sure everything fell into place. My mind raced as I read more. I could feel my pulse quicken as I stumbled across a message that made everything click. It was from Lila. Once he finds out, it'll be too late. We can't let him ruin everything. I sat there, frozen, the words spinning in my mind. I had been right all along. There was something bigger happening, something I had only begun to uncover. Alara wasn't just keeping secrets from me. She was part of something. Something that involved more than just her. I closed the phone and took a deep breath. I needed to think. I couldn't let my emotions control me. This wasn't just about Alara anymore. This was about understanding the full scope of what was going on. It wasn't just a betrayal. It was a conspiracy, a web of lies that I had unknowingly walked into. I couldn't let her know what I had found. Not yet. I needed to gather more information, to figure out who else was involved, and most importantly, what their endgame was. I couldn't trust anyone, not even her. Later that night, I decided to test her. I had to push her, see how far she would go to protect whatever it was they were hiding. I didn't confront her directly, but I casually brought up the topic of her and Lila's plans. I watched her carefully, studying every reaction. At first, she tried to play it off, laughing awkwardly and saying it was nothing. But the longer I kept pushing, the more defensive she became. By the time she stormed out of the room, I knew I was onto something. I had pushed her too far, and the truth was closer than ever. Now, I had no choice. The next move was mine. But this time, I wouldn't be left in the dark. I would expose the truth, no matter what it took. I didn't sleep much that night. Every time I closed my eyes, I kept seeing the same thing. Alara, sitting in the kitchen, laughing with a stranger I didn't know. The man's name was Matt, but the way he acted around her was enough to make my stomach churn. There was something unsettling about their chemistry. It wasn't just a casual friendship. There was a closeness there, a familiarity that ran deeper than anything I could recall in our own relationship. I couldn't shake the image of them together, and it gnawed at me, slowly unraveling any sense of peace I had left. The next morning, I acted like everything was fine. It wasn't the first time I'd had to mask my emotions, but this time it felt different. My thoughts were in overdrive, constantly turning over new possibilities, new theories. What if Alara had been planning this for a while? What if she had been lying to me about everything, all along? How deep did this go? These weren't just questions anymore. They were my reality. Alara, as usual, left for work. But this time, I had a plan. I wasn't going to sit idly by and wait for her to slip up again. I was going to take control. But it wasn't just about finding more clues or catching her in a lie. No, this time, I was going to get answers. I was done being left in the dark. I had a few hours before she would be back, and I was going to use that time wisely. First, I went through her belongings again. I needed to be methodical, careful. Every detail had to be accounted for. It wasn't about snooping anymore. This was a full-blown investigation. I searched through her drawer, her closet, and even the things she thought I would never touch. I was ruthless in my pursuit of the truth. And then, I found something. It was hidden under a pile of papers in the corner of her drawer. A thick envelope, sealed with a piece of tape. I pulled it out, my hands trembling as I peeled it open. Inside was a set of documents, receipts, and a few handwritten notes. It took me a second to understand what I was looking at. The receipts were for hotels, flights, dates that didn't match up with anything I remembered. There was a note on the top of the stack, scribbled quickly, almost too hurriedly to be neat. We can't afford to make any more mistakes. It's time. Once we move him out of the picture, there's no turning back. My heart stopped. I couldn't breathe. I could barely make sense of what I was reading. I knew I had to be wrong. This had to be some sort of misunderstanding. But the more I read, the more I realized I was right. This wasn't just a secret affair or some minor indiscretion. This was something far worse. A plan. A plot. And it involved me. I reread the note, trying to make sense of it. The words, "move him out of the picture," kept echoing in my head. What did that mean? Was she planning to leave me? Was this about breaking up with me for good? Or was there something darker at play here? The question burned in my mind, and for a moment, I thought I might pass out. The weight of what I had just discovered was too much to process all at once. I had to act fast. I couldn't wait for Alara to come home and explain. I needed to find out who else was involved. I needed to figure out what they were planning, and I needed to do it before it was too late. I grabbed my phone and called Lila. I had to get her to talk. Maybe she wasn't directly involved, but she knew something. I knew it. She had to know. I dialed her number, my hands shaking as I waited for her to pick up. When she did, her voice sounded strange. She was cautious, as if she knew I was about to ask her something uncomfortable. "Hey, Tobias," she said, her tone just a little too careful. "What's up? Where's Alara?" I asked, not bothering to hide the suspicion in my voice. Lila hesitated for a long moment before answering. "She's at work." "Why?" "I need to know the truth, Lila," I said, my voice shaking with a mixture of anger and fear. "What's going on with her? What's happening between you, her, and that guy, Matt? I'm not stupid. I know something's going on." There was a long pause. I could hear her breathing on the other end of the line, but she didn't say anything. I could tell she was trying to come up with something to say, but she couldn't. I pressed her harder. "You need to tell me, Lila. What is Alara planning? What's the truth?" Finally, her voice cracked. I can't," she whispered. "Tobias, you're in way over your head. You don't know what you're dealing with. It's not what you think." Her words hung in the air like a threat. I felt a cold chill run down my spine. What the hell was going on? Before I could ask anything more, she hung up. I stood there, staring at my phone, my mind racing. The conversation with Lila had only deepened the mystery. What wasn't she telling me? What was it that I didn't know? I had reached a breaking point. I couldn't let this go on any longer. I needed to confront Alara, but I couldn't do it without knowing everything first. I had to piece together the rest of the puzzle, but I knew that doing so would force me into a corner, one that I might not be able to escape from. The storm was building, and I was standing right in its path. No one was going to save me. It was up to me to figure out the truth before everything I had known came crashing down, and I was running out of time. The pieces of my life, once neatly put together, were slipping through my fingers faster than I could hold on. Every step I took toward the truth only seemed to pull me deeper into a web of deception I hadn't even known existed. Every person I trusted, every conversation I had once thought innocent, now seemed tainted with secrets I wasn't supposed to know. Alara's behavior, Lila's silence, Matt's presence, it was all converging in ways I couldn't have predicted. I sat in the dark of the living room that night, the glow of the television the only thing keeping me company. The house felt empty despite the fact that Alara was upstairs, probably already preparing for bed. I had spent the day turning over every possible scenario in my mind. What if I confronted her tonight? What if I waited until tomorrow? But deep down, I knew I had to act fast. The longer I waited, the more control I lost, and the more they seemed to tighten their grip. The documents, the cryptic notes, the disappearing texts, they all led me to one conclusion. Alara had been hiding something for a long time, but it wasn't just about an affair. No, this was much bigger than that. There were plans in motion, and it was clear that I wasn't part of them. It was as though I were the last person to realize that the life I'd built with her was nothing more than a facade. I couldn't ignore it anymore. I needed to confront her, but I had to be prepared for whatever was coming. That night, I lay awake in bed, staring at the ceiling, my thoughts racing. I kept thinking about that note I had found. Once we move him out of the picture, there's no turning back. What did it mean? Who were we? And why was I the one in the way? Was I the obstacle that had to be eliminated? And if so, what was the real plan? At the same time, I couldn't shake the image of Alara with Matt. Something about that man, that connection they shared, felt like a thread that ran through everything. I couldn't understand it. I couldn't figure out why he was so important. I couldn't keep spinning in circles. I needed answers, and I knew I wasn't going to get them by sitting back. The next morning, I decided to follow Alara. I needed to see where she was going, who she was meeting, and how far this had all gone. She was supposed to leave for work early again, and I waited for her to get into her car, watching from the window as she drove off. But this time, I wasn't going to let her slip through my fingers. I grabbed my coat, my heart racing as I stepped out the door. It wasn't my style to spy or follow her like this, but I had no choice. I had to know what she was doing. I had to know what was really going on. I trailed her for miles, making sure I stayed a safe distance behind. She didn't head to her office. Instead, she drove to a quiet, secluded part of town, a place I had never seen before. It was a small, run-down building on the corner of a forgotten street. I didn't know what it was, but I knew one thing for sure. It was the last place I ever expected her to be. She parked in front of the building and walked toward the entrance. I couldn't see who she was meeting, but I was certain it wasn't just a casual errand. There was something deliberate in the way she moved, like she was on a mission. I stayed in my car, heart pounding, as I watched her disappear inside. I didn't know how long I would wait, but I couldn't leave now. The truth was right there, just beyond those doors. What felt like hours passed, but eventually, the door to the building opened again. Alara walked out, this time accompanied by Matt. They spoke quietly, exchanging words I couldn't hear, but their body language said everything. They were close, too close. They weren't just colleagues or old friends or whatever the hell Alara had told me. They were partners. I watched them drive off together, and my mind spun with the implications. What was going on between them? Why had she kept me in the dark for so long? And why had she gone to such lengths to keep me out of this part of her life? I had to follow them again, but this time, I couldn't just sit in the car. I couldn't just watch from the sidelines anymore. I had to confront her. The tension in my chest was unbearable as I followed them back to her apartment. I parked a few blocks away, my hands trembling as I debated my next move. I wanted to rush in, demand the truth right then and there, but I knew I couldn't. I had to be strategic. I had to make her tell me everything. I waited for them to go inside, then approached the building cautiously. My heart was hammering in my ears, and my thoughts were a mess of frustration and anger. I had to find out what was happening. I knocked on the door. A moment of silence passed before I heard footsteps approaching. The door opened, and Alara stood there, her eyes widening in shock when she saw me. She quickly masked her expression, but I could tell she was caught off guard. "What are you doing here?" she asked, her voice slightly defensive. "I could ask you the same thing," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. "What's going on, Alara? What's happening with you and Matt?" Her face paled for a second, and I could see the wheels turning in her head. She wasn't expecting this. But before she could answer, I stepped inside. "I'm done waiting for answers, Alara," I said, my voice rising. "What's going on? Who's Matt? Why are you doing this to me?" She opened her mouth to speak, but no words came out. Instead, her eyes darted nervously, as though she was searching for an escape. For a moment, I thought she might run, but then she just stood there, frozen. Finally, she spoke. "I never wanted you to find out like this," she whispered, her voice barely audible. I could feel the weight of the moment pressing down on me. This was it. This was the confrontation I had been avoiding. And yet, it was nothing like I imagined. There was no shouting, no wild accusations. Just silence. "Then tell me, Alara," I said, my voice shaking with the need for the truth. "Tell me what's been going on. Tell me what you've been hiding from me." Her eyes met mine for the first time in what felt like forever. And for the first time, I saw something in them I hadn't seen before: guilt. Deep, overwhelming guilt. And that was the moment I knew the worst was yet to come. Alara's eyes met mine with a mixture of fear and something darker, something I couldn't quite place. The silence stretched between us, unbearable, as if the air itself was holding its breath. She shifted uncomfortably on her feet, her hand gripping the doorframe, as if it were the only thing keeping her from falling apart. I could see her processing the situation, the weight of the lie hanging over her like a dark cloud. "You don't understand," she whispered, almost pleading. "I didn't want you to find out like this." I stood there, heart pounding, trying to steady myself. "Then how did you want me to find out, Alara? How long were you planning on keeping this from me?" My voice cracked with a mixture of anger and disbelief, and I could feel the dam I'd built up inside of me starting to break. Every word felt like a punch, and yet, it wasn't even close to the real question. I had 1,000 thoughts racing through my mind, but the only thing that mattered now was the truth. I couldn't keep living in this fog. I had already seen enough, heard enough. The puzzle pieces were coming together, but the picture they were forming was far darker than I had imagined. Alara took a deep breath, looking away, her eyes filling with something I couldn't interpret. She seemed to be fighting with herself, debating whether or not to tell me everything. For a moment, I wondered if she would just turn away again, retreat into the lies she'd been living. But then, she finally spoke, her voice barely audible. "It's not what you think," she began, hesitating as if each word was a battle she couldn't win. "Matt, he's been part of this for a long time. But it's not just him. It's me too. We've been planning something." I felt like the world had shifted beneath my feet. "We've been planning something?" My breath caught in my throat as I tried to make sense of her words. "What are you talking about?" I demanded, my pulse quickening. "What have you been planning, Alara? What's all this about?" She met my eyes then, and for the first time in what felt like years, I saw something in her that shook me. It wasn't guilt or sadness, or even regret. It was something else entirely. Something colder, more detached. Almost calculated. I didn't want to hurt you, Tobias, she said softly, her eyes flicking to the side, as if avoiding my gaze. But we needed you out of the way. It wasn't personal. It's just the plan. It had to be this way. A chill ran down my spine, and for a moment, I couldn't move, couldn't speak. What do you mean out of the way? What the hell does that even mean? I asked, my voice rising now, the edge of panic creeping in. What have you been doing, Alara? She took a step back, pressing her hands together in front of her as if trying to keep herself together. I never meant for it to go this far. I didn't expect to fall in love with him. The words came out in a rush, like she had been holding them back for so long. But now that they were out, she seemed almost relieved. It was as if the weight of the truth had finally been lifted off her shoulders, but I felt like I had been punched in the gut. The air around me felt thick, suffocating. In love with him? I repeated, my voice barely audible. So that's what all this was about. You were never honest with me? You've been lying to me for how long? For months? For years? I didn't know how to tell you, she said quietly, the words now coming slower, each one heavier than the last. I couldn't. At first, it was just a mistake. Just something that happened. But the more I got pulled into it, the harder it was to leave. And then, when we started talking about it, the plan, she faltered, as if she realized just how far she'd gone in this twisted web of secrets. My mind was racing, but my body felt like it was frozen in place. A storm was gathering inside me, but I couldn't even comprehend the magnitude of it yet. The plan? What plan? I asked, my voice shaking now with frustration and disbelief. Alara, tell me everything. I'm not leaving here until I know what's been going on. What you have been doing. What was the point of all this? Why did you let me live this lie? She bit her lip, her expression torn between guilt and something darker, something more calculating. It started small, she said, her voice distant, like she was trying to detach herself from the words she was saying. Matt and I. We met years ago, but at the time, it didn't mean anything. But then we realized how much power we could have together. You were in the way, Tobias. And I. She stopped, looking down at her hands as if she couldn't bring herself to say it. I took a step forward, my heart pounding in my chest. And what, Alara? What power? What did you think you were going to accomplish by doing this? She finally looked up at me, and there was a moment of raw honesty in her eyes, a vulnerability I hadn't seen in her in years. It was never about you. It was always about what we could do together, what Matt and I could do together. We had the chance to take control, Tobias, to change everything. I felt like I had been struck with a physical blow. Control? I whispered. You've been plotting to control everything, haven't you? The realization hit me like a freight train, and I suddenly saw everything with terrifying clarity. The secrecy, the lies, the manipulation, all of it. You were never part of the plan, she said, her voice flat, detached. And you never would have been. I stared at her, feeling the pieces click into place in a way that almost made me sick. So what now, Alara? What happens next? What happens when I'm out of the way? Her eyes flicked to the door, and I followed her gaze, seeing Matt standing just outside, watching us through the crack. He hadn't left. He'd been listening the entire time. I felt a wave of cold fury surge through me. It wasn't just Alara anymore. This wasn't just a betrayal between two people. This was bigger. This was a conspiracy, and it wasn't going to stop with just me. Now, Alara said quietly, now we finish what we started. The air between us crackled with tension, and I realized, with a sinking feeling in my chest, that I was about to learn just how far Alara was willing to go, how far they were willing to go, to get what they wanted. And I wasn't sure I'd survive it. I could feel the weight of the room, suffocating, the words hanging in the air between us like a storm about to break. Matt's cold eyes were locked on me, and Alara's posture had shifted, no longer a wife trying to defend her actions, but someone who had made a decision long ago, sealed it with lies, and now stood on the precipice of something irreversible. For a moment, I thought I would drown in the chaos of everything I had learned: betrayal, manipulation, deceit. But then, something inside me shifted. The anger that had consumed me suddenly made way for clarity. I was standing at the edge of a cliff, but I didn't have to fall. I had the power to choose, to take control of my own life, my own future. I don't know who you've become, Alara, I said, my voice calm, but firm. But I do know that I'm not going to stand here and let you ruin everything we've built. You've made your choices, but I'm making mine now. For the first time in what felt like forever, Alara seemed to waver. She shifted her weight from one foot to the other, her eyes darting away from me, as if the gravity of what she had done was finally hitting her. Matt didn't speak, but his presence was an unspoken challenge. He knew he was part of this mess, but I wasn't going to let him control the narrative anymore. I'm done being a pawn in someone else's game, I continued. You want to control everything, but I refuse to let you control me any longer. You may have planned this, but you didn't plan on me fighting back. I walked toward Alara, feeling every step resonate with power. There was no more hesitation in my movements. You don't have to do this, Alara. This doesn't have to be the end. But if you want to keep going down this path, then you're on your own. I'm not going to be part of this anymore. The silence that followed was thick, but something in her eyes changed. For the first time, I saw a flicker of regret, a realization that maybe she had been wrong, that maybe she had let something bigger than herself control her actions. Matt, sensing the shift, took a step back, his face hardening. It wasn't the triumphant expression I expected. It was a man who knew he'd lost ground. A man who saw that the game had changed, and he wasn't going to win this one. I'm done, I said firmly, turning away. You both have your own path now, but I'm not a part of it. As I stepped out of the house, the weight lifted off me. The knot that had been tightening in my chest for so long was finally starting to loosen. I wasn't powerless anymore. I wasn't the victim in their game. I had chosen a different way, one where I could stand on my own 2 feet, where I could rebuild my life without the shadows of betrayal hanging over me. The air outside felt different, fresh. I felt free, like I had just taken the first step toward something new, something better. Days passed, and I focused on healing. I took time for myself, rediscovered the things I loved, the things that made me feel whole again. I started seeing friends again, people who had been pushed aside in the chaos. I went back to my passions, my work, things that brought me peace. But the most unexpected thing happened. A few weeks later, I received a message from Alara. I hadn't expected to hear from her again, not after everything that had unfolded. The message was short, just a few lines, but it was enough. I'm sorry, Tobias. I was wrong. I let my fear and insecurities take over, and I hurt you. You didn't deserve that. I hope one day we can talk, and maybe even start over. It wasn't the grand apology I might have hoped for, but it was real. It was her taking responsibility for her actions, for the first time in a long time. And for that, I was grateful. I didn't know if Alara and I could ever rebuild what we had. The trust that had been shattered was too fragile to fix overnight. But I knew one thing for certain. I had found strength in the most unexpected way. The ending of that chapter didn't have to be the end of my story. It was just the beginning of something new, something brighter. And so, I walked forward, carrying the lessons from the past with me, but never letting them define my future. Because the truth was, no one, not even those I loved most, could control my fate. Only I could do that, and I was ready to write the next chapter on my terms.